Hello, good day everyone. Welcome to another edition of our weekly Azure webinars. I am once again your host, Herns Hermida. I'm the Cloud and Enterprise Business Lead for Microsoft Philippines. Today's topic this week is what is your cloud strategy? So for those of you who have attended these types of webinars before, you know the rules. For those of you who are attending this the first time or need to be reminded, there are a couple of rules that I'd like to mention. First of all, this entire webinar is recorded, so you can actually go through this webinar at your own time and at the place of your convenience. You will actually get an email with the URL to the link to the recording of this webinar. So all you need is a device and an internet connection. So in case you are late in any part of this webinar or you miss some parts of this webinar, don't fret. You can actually listen to the recording once again. The other thing is that there is a Q&A window as part of your webinar interface in your browser. So you can pop in any question during the course of this webinar. I will try to answer those questions while I am doing this webinar. I also have a couple of producers here with me in the room to answer some of your questions just in case you're you popped in any questions in the Q&A. So please feel free to pop in any questions in the Q&A window. All right, so let's get going. So today's webinar is about building the beginnings of a cloud strategy. So let's say, for example, you are the CIO or the decision maker of an organization who plans to go to the cloud but don't know exactly where to start. So first, let's try to understand that cloud momentum continues to accelerate. The no cloud policy will be as rare as the no internet policy as it is today, according to Gartner. It is very rare that you will find an organization that absolutely says, I'm not going to use any form of cloud service. The second is the question is no longer how do I move to cloud? Instead, it's now going to be now that I'm in the cloud, how do I make sure I've optimized my investment and also my risk exposure? So once we've gotten through the hurdle of figuring out whether we're going to go to the cloud or not, the next thing is what do we bring to the cloud? What do we remain on premise? What is going to be our strategy moving forward to optimize our costs so that we can take advantage of the promise of the cloud of cost efficiency. And the third thing is that by 2020, which is a year from now, according to IDC, clouds will stop being referred to as public and private. They will simply be the de facto way that IT is provisioned. Now, the common challenges that we hear from our enterprise customers, I'm pretty sure that this is the same challenges that you are experiencing as well, is the three things that you see there in front of you. One is I am unable to deliver the services that my business requires because of the lack of resources that I have in terms of hardware and software, and the lack of expandability in my physical data center. The second is my infrastructure is extremely complex and difficult to manage because over the years you've accumulated a lot of hardware and a lot of software solutions from multiple vendors. So therefore it is difficult to manage all of that at the same time. And the third thing and the most common one is IT budgets continue to shrink. It's quite rare, especially nowadays where IT budgets are actually increasing. So the common complaint now is I don't have the capital budget requirement or budget required to keep my infrastructure up. So this is where the cloud comes in. The other thing is that we'd have to understand that maintaining aging technology creates a lot of barriers. So for example, currently or yesterday, we have different application silos. We have static apps. We have servers and infrastructure to manage. There's upfront capacity planning and fixed scale. So our capacity plan, we cannot see beyond 3 to 5 years of what our capacity plan is supposed to be, and we can't do that simply because we don't have the capital expenditure to expect to spend that amount of money for that long-term capacity planning. Your infrastructure is usually also optimized for security threats that have been happening at 10 decades old, a decade old. So that's why um, we have to consider the fact that a lot of these security threats are changing every day. And our infrastructure also built for hardware and software where we fall victim into hardware and software refresh cycles. So today, in today's world, where we have multiple options for cloud and also hybrid infrastructures would involve on-premise and cloud components. We can now create multi-channel applications for web, mobile, and agents and IoT implementations, data-driven apps that can be personalized in real time. We almost immediately remove the maintenance efforts and redirect that efforts towards innovation rather than keeping the lights on. We experience elastic and unlimited scale. We now are better protected simply because a lot of these cloud solution vendors cannot, including Microsoft, would not survive at this rate if we do not protect you against the latest and the biggest security threats that are out there. And then we no longer fall victim into obsolescence, but rather innovation is actually built in. So there are three main benefits to the cloud. So whenever anybody asks anybody of us here, what are the three main benefits? What are the three main benefits of the cloud? It all whittles down to three things. First is the faster time of provisioning and faster time to market. So if you have an application that you need to bring to market immediately, as in within the same day, you don't have to wait for hardware and software components to come in order for you to go into production. The second thing is the confidence. Every cloud service provider or every cloud service out there, including that of Microsoft, is backed up by a service level agreement. It is a commitment from the service provider that this service will always be available or almost available at the maximum amount of time. And the third thing is performance. So a lot of these cloud vendors, including Microsoft, we, for example, invest on billions and dollars to make sure that the hardware that we use is always the latest and the greatest. So now, given the previous limitations, you can now overcome, because now you can now have the ability to be on demand and drive innovation. So you can now extend your data center between the beyond the four walls of your data center, but by having almost unlimited capacity available in the cloud. You can achieve through hybrid cloud because you now have a unified platform across your data center and the cloud, making it easily to truly achieve a hybrid solution. And now you can now devote your attention to truly transforming your business and using digital innovations and digital technology to create your own digital capabilities so that you can dynamically respond to the needs of your business. So there are a few basics that we need to cover over here. So for some of you who already know this, let's treat this as sort of a review. So which cloud are we talking about? In a traditional on-premise world, all the entire computing stack, from networking to server to storage to everything, including the application, is managed and maintained by yourself in your own data center infrastructure. Whenever you use infrastructure as a service, or what is commonly called as IaaS, you see some examples there on the right side, Azure being the more prominent. And just to be fair with our other with the market, there are also other IaaS vendors out there. So the IaaS vendors, or infrastructure as a service vendors, provide virtualization, server storage, and networking, and you basically create virtual machines on top of their platform and choose the operating system that you would like to run on those virtual machines, and then install the middleware, runtime data, and the applications, all of which you manage. For platform as a service, the vendor, such as Azure, for example, runs everything from networking, including the runtime environment, and all you need to provide is the data and the application. So let's take the case of managed SQL Server, where you just configure an instance of SQL Server, put in all the data in SQL Server, and then let's say, for example, you're running a web application. You just provide the code, and there is a platform as a service component in Azure called, say, Azure Web Service, where you just simply run the code and not worry about how many servers you're going to need for scalability purposes. And finally, you have software as a service. A best example of that is application services such as Dynamics 365 or Office 365, where everything, including the applications, is provided for by Microsoft or the cloud provider, and all you need to do is configure the user accounts and configure the application to suit your business needs and your business requirements. It is also important for us to understand that there is a delineation of responsibility when it comes to things such as security and maintenance across IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. So as you can see there on the right side, there are some move-in ready options. Like for example, SaaS. When you sign up for Office 365, you can use immediately with minimal configuration. Practically, the only thing that you need to do at minimum is to set up the user accounts in Azure Active Directory, and then that's it. You go off and running. And then you can do the optional parts like migrating emails from your legacy email system or files from your SharePoint on-premise to SharePoint online, or some examples like that. There are options where you will require some assembly. So existing services are a starting point, but you need to have configuration for a custom fit. So for example, platform as a service, all we provide is we are responsible making sure that the availability and the uptime is all the way up to the runtime environment, but the data and the applications is yours. Um, do note that in IaaS, you are responsible for the maintenance of everything that runs within the virtual machine that Microsoft provides. So the operating system all the way to the applications is actually your responsibility and not ours. Now, let's talk a little bit about hybrid. What exactly do we mean by hybrid? So, for those of you who are listening to this and have basic knowledge about cloud services, hybrid essentially means it's a combination of the usage of components that are in the public cloud that's hosted by Microsoft, such as Azure, and components that are currently on-premise. On premises, usually you have a single tenant implementation, meaning everything that you run in your data center is actually for your own exclusive use. It is owned and operated by yourself, and you also define your own data management policy. Now, if you look on the right side, hybrid, on the other hand, is a combination of private or one or more public clouds. So consider the fact that in the public cloud infrastructure, such as Microsoft, that infrastructure, of course, is not exclusively yours. It is actually technically shared by thousands of other customers. But we can get into discussions on how we delineate or separate data between these different customers. But trust me, the biggest customers in the world use our multi-tenant. It's called a multi-tenant environment. So going into a hybrid situation allows you as an IT organization to become brokers of services. This means that you can actually choose between services from different vendors. You can have a multi-cloud environment, so you can run stuff on Azure and you can run stuff on the other clouds as well. Service and automation also capabilities also provide your new agility. A lot of these capabilities that are running on public cloud platforms don't necessarily need to be maintained and managed manually. The same scripting, same automation environments that you typically do on premise, you also do on the cloud as well. Now, also consider that in a typical public cloud environment, such as Microsoft, we operate across multiple regions. So this illustration here is basically saying that Microsoft Azure is currently operating on 54 different regions. Now, mind you that each region is not composed of one data center. It's actually composed of multiple data centers. In certain regions, there are two data centers. There are certain regions there are more than two data centers. So there are 54 regions across all over the world. You can go to the Azure website to know which regions we are operating in, but we are operating across 6 continents right now. And the number of regions is actually more than AWS and Google combined. Now, the reason why customers like you would want to consider going to the cloud and also starting to build the cloud strategy is deeply rooted on what is triggering your consideration of the cloud. So the real question is, why do you want to go to the cloud? So it may fall under one or more of the reasons that you see in front of here. So it simply means that if you go from left to right, your data center lease or your leasing space in your data center, you need to let go of it, and therefore you need to look for additional space. You want to integrate acquisitions. So let's say you're an organization that acquired another company and you need to integrate them quickly. You have urgent capacity needs, especially, for example, if you're in a business that's highly cyclical and depending on the seasons, wherein the demand of your application depends on the amount of users that are accessing your applications. Let's say an e-commerce site that gets access several times more over during the Christmas season. You have a lot of components or hardware or software that needs to be refreshed because they are no longer supported by the vendor. You're exposed and you're worried about the security threats. You simply are acknowledging the fact that you do not want to fight these security threats by yourself, and therefore you want to leverage on the almost unlimited capability to fight cybersecurity threats from Microsoft, for example. You also want to be more compliant. So it's hard to be compliant with certain compliance standards, such as, for example, the Data Privacy Act, the GDPR in Europe, and certain standards. So the fast way of doing this is to simply use the service of a provider that already is compliant with a lot of the compliance rules that you need to be compliant with. You want to innovate your applications faster, and of course, and also one of the reasons is also end of support, software end of support. You may have software that is already ending support and is no longer supported by a vendor. So therefore, a cloud strategy is considered a modernization strategy, because modernization strategy on the other then drives innovation and growth. You reduce the amount of administration by removing the day-to-day administration, such as patching, network setup, because into a large extent this is already taken care of by Microsoft. You also want to remove the need to wait for servers and resources. You can get applications and websites running in minutes. So this is the agility that we were referring to a while ago. You also want to do in-depth and better analysis by acquiring more and more data. Because, for example, um, uh, one of our customers, Anheuser-Busch, in the slide, for example, are able to create personalization platforms. And the only way that they are able to personalize their products and service offers to customers as accurately as possible is to collect as much information about their customers as quickly as possible. And the only way that they could do that cheaply is through the cloud. So the organizations that harness data, the cloud, and AI outperforms their peers. According to some research, they double their operating margin, and they also increase their operating income. Now, in particular, end of support, software end of support, I just like to remind everyone that Windows Server and SQL Server 2008 and 2008 R2 are already near or at end of support. SQL Server and 2008 and R2 have already ended support in July 9th of 2009. So we are already plus 1 month of end of support. So if you're currently running SQL Server 2008 or R2, you will no longer get security updates from Microsoft. So therefore, you will expose your organization to compliance and regulatory concerns. You are also exposing yourselves into additional cost and support and patches, and this you can also consider this as an innovation opportunity that you have lost. Windows Server 2008 and R2 will end support in 14th of January 2020. Now, when we talk about modernization, it is also inevitable to double click into or go into a deeper level of what do we want to do? Do we actually want to do migration, or do we want to do modernization? So on premises, essentially, you have applications, you have data, and you have infrastructure. So you would have to make a decision as part of your cloud strategy on for each application, data, and infrastructure component. So each application, you'd have to do an inventory of all of the applications, consider all of the owners, where are they running, what platforms are they running on, what databases are they using, what code are they running on, what is the size of the physical or the virtual machine that they're running on, and others. What the data components they currently have. Are you currently running a data warehouse? Are you currently running a data mart? Or are you just simply storing archive data? And of course, the underlying infrastructure, such as the network, etc. For each of these components, you'd need to make a decision whether you want to migrate or modernize. So, which means you have to rehost, refactor, or re-architect. I'll talk about more of these three later on. Or you simply want to rebuild or renew any of these components to make it cloud native, or simply replace them with software as a service. So it essentially means that you will need components on Azure, such as virtual machines, containers, app and data, and AI, and other platform as a service or PaaS services, and overlay security and management across that. So let's talk about it a little bit further. So say you have say you have a list of applications that you currently have that are running in your data center. Say, for example, a CRM application. Say, for example, let's say it's a 10-year-old CRM application that you custom built, and it's currently running on Windows Server 2008 using SQL Server 2008 as a database, which, as you have seen in the previous slide, has already ended support. So you'd have to make a decision. What do you want to do? Do you want to simply rehost it or redeploy it as a cloud? So meaning if it's running on a virtual machine or even if it's running on a physical machine, you convert it to a virtual machine and move it to Azure, as is with no changes to the code. So what are the drivers here? The drivers is you want to reduce the capex, you want to free up data center space as quickly as possible, and you also want to get a quick return on investments on your cloud investment. So the technologies that you would need here is IaaS components such as virtual machines, storage, and networking. Now the good news is that if you are currently running EO in this example, since you are running it on end of support platforms, which is Windows Server and SQL Server 2008 and 2008 R2, when you move it to Azure, Microsoft will continue to support these platforms as long as they run on Azure. It's only this is the we are the only ones that will provide continuous support on these unsupported platforms on Azure. Other cloud vendors will not do that for you. The second option is refactoring, meaning you want to minimally alter to make the advantage of the cloud. So for example, you're the same CRM application that we were talking about in this example, you want to deploy that as a container and some of the code you want to run it on PaaS components. So this will give you the drivers here would include because you wanted faster or shorter updates, you wanted code productive portability and also greater cloud efficiency. You may also make a decision to re-architect the entire application, meaning it's a 10-year-old application, so maybe this is time for us to re-architect it and materially this could alter or decompose the application into multiple smaller services and use technologies such as web services, serverless capabilities, and microservices capabilities to make it more cloud native. And the drivers there is you want the application to be better scalable. You want it to be easily adaptable to newer cloud capabilities. And then finally, rebuilding it. You just simply dump the entire application and rebuild the entire application from scratch using the same platform as a service components that I just talked about previously, so that you can accelerate the innovation, build the apps faster, and then manage it better using DevOps and Agile, and also reduce the operational cost. What is not here in the slide, by the way, on the extreme right-hand side, if I was to write something here, is to simply replace it. Okay, replacing it means that, oh, I don't want to use this 10-year-old CRM application. It's way past its life already. So I simply replace it with Dynamics 365. So I spent a lot of time in this slide because this is kind of an important slide to build your cloud strategy. Once you've already inventoried all of your applications in front of you, you'd have to make a decision whether you want to rehost it, refactor it, re-architect, rebuild it, or even replace it. Now, here's an example of a transformation journey. So say, for example, the immediate goal of your transformation journey to the cloud is to get out of your on-premise database by a certain date, or simply reduce your data center footprint significantly by a certain date. So infrastructure, this would trigger infrastructure-oriented capabilities or activities. So means rehosting and to a certain extent, refactoring applications and moving them to VMs on the cloud or containers. So you also save dollars with hybrid benefits or end of support offers and right sizing. We can talk about a little later if we have the time to discuss the cost savings that you will immediately get if you move, for example, Windows Server and SQL Server to Azure. So that's really the objective here, is to move as much as you can from on-premise to the cloud. And then, as you can see there's an arrow. Then once it's already on the cloud, part of your plan is then modernizing the stuff that is already on the cloud because you already met your objective of getting out of the data center by a certain date. Now you can make sound decisions on which one you want to modernize, refactoring, re-architecting, or rebuilding it. Okay. Another example is a similar example is if your transformation journey is driven by app innovation and operations efficiency rather than getting out of a data center at a certain date. So this is slightly different because not only you're not, whereas in the previous example, you are moving stuff on the cloud as VMs or containers as quickly as possible, and then later on making decisions to modernize them one by one. In this case, you are doing both at the same time. You've got applications that you are moving immediately to the cloud to take advantage of, let's say, end of support offers from Microsoft, or simply because you don't have the time to modernize these applications, but the applications that you do have the time and the resources to modernize, you're already doing that at the same time as well. Okay, so there are different paths and different, but there's one journey to the cloud. So as you can see here on this table, if you get a recording of this webinar, you can pause here at this point and you can see the different objectives that fall under rehosting, refactoring, re-architecting, and rebuilding it. So consider this as your master list of justifications as to why you want to rehost, refactor, re-architect, rebuild, or even replace certain applications. So as you can see here, let me pick out a couple of things that we did not mention previously. So let's say you want to enable business agility with continuous innovation. That's not going to be delivered by rehosting. It would have to be either refactoring it, meaning converting them to containers, or rebuilding the applications or re-architecting them. So how do you build the portfolio? There are two approaches. One is the top-down approach. So here's a example. So when you list down all of your applications, you list down the workloads, the architecture, how much you're paying for it, the risk of moving the application, not really the risk of moving the application from on-premise to the cloud from the technical perspective, but the risk of downtime and also the risk of because inevitably some of these applications would have to be brought down and become unavailable for a certain amount of time. So it depends on your tolerance level as an organization, whether you're okay with certain applications being down for 24 hours or more or something like that. Now, the operations aspects and also the security. So then you make a decision whether you want to replace, rebuild, rehost, or refactor. Um, so if you look at this side over here, it each one also represents this one also represents a certain level of difficulty for each one. So the level of difficulty here, rebuilding, of course, is going to be the most difficult. Is going to be the most difficult option for you, usually. Usually, because this would require looking at the application itself and looking at the components and essentially breaking it down and rebuilding it from scratch. The easiest one, of course, is rehosting because you're essentially not changing any part of the application. You're just simply moving it from one data center to another, essentially. All right, so let's say you've got all this list of applications. So you may have applications that you've identified that I'm just going to do lift and shift. Then I'm going to take advantage of the backup and archive and BCDR capabilities of Azure. I've got dev tests and stuff. So this may be representative of a list of the things that you are list of the applications that you have. So it may not just be cloud scenarios, it may actually be a list of actual applications. Then one approach is mapping it according to the impact on the impact of migration. So for example, the applications that go to this quadrant is relatively low effort, but if I move it to the cloud, the impact to the organization is pretty significant. So for example, in this example, number 7, SAP on Azure. So if I move my existing SAP on Azure by rehosting it on SAP on virtual machines on Azure, it's a relatively low effort. So it's right there in the middle between low and high. But once I move it to the cloud, say for example, the immediate benefit is that a lot more people are able to use SAP and you can scale SAP much better and much faster than before. So in terms of the impact, it's higher. On the other hand, you may have low impact and low effort. So this would be some of your applications that would be infrastructure lift and shift. And then make a decision on which one you want to go, which one you do first. So the dollars and the so put in dollars in terms of cost and effort for each one so that you can keep track of the potential costs and the efforts for each one. And this at this point you use a project plan, for example, to figure out whether which ones can happen at the same time or which one needs to happen first after the other. And of course, prioritize. Another approach, the complementary approach, if you will, is more tactical and technical in nature. It's the bottom-up approach, meaning you assess the application, identify the blockers, evaluate your server. So this one approach is not more of the application, not looking at the impact of the application business-wise, but it's a really um, technical approach in terms of evaluating applications to go to the cloud. So the application decision framework may be server technical assessment, right sizing the virtual machine, what are the dependencies of the application or the virtual machine on other virtual machines, what's the roadmap that you wanted to use, what's the business factor, and how do you remediate this risk. And then you make a decision. Do you want to rehost? Do you want to do a hybrid deployment? Do you want to do you just simply want to retire? Do you simply want to retire applications and you want to some applications because admittedly needs to retire. Inevitably, when you put down a list of the applications, when you put together a list of the applications, you will find that some of these applications should actually be retired and no longer be used by the company. So therefore, it makes it a little bit easier. So again, this is a complementary approach. I'm not saying that one top-down or bottom-up approach is better one over the other, but it often is a good idea to use both approaches at the same time. Because when you do the top-down approach, you already know which applications to move, and then you make a decision based on level of difficulty, cost, as well as impact to the business. But you'd have to temper that also with the actual technical difficulty, the technical degree of difficulty, if you will, to migrate that to the cloud. So here's a great example of a hybrid cloud strategy approach. The so the one of the things that you need to do is to educate. You need to demystify the cloud terms and the language, especially when we talk to decision makers who will actually sign the checks on whether we're going to Azure or not, which one stays on-prem. You have to explain to them what IaaS is, what SaaS is, what PaaS is, and what is the different approaches like refactor, rebuild, so on. So don't try to hide behind jargon, and don't try to hide behind these jargon, because when they get confused, some of them get angry and they probably would not approve your project. Familiarize your different cloud offerings. So look at the platforms, the tools, and the different cloud app providers. Like for example, in the case of Azure, there are many options for virtual machines. There are some virtual machines which are pretty small, some of them pretty large, some of them are optimized for SAP, some of them are optimized for very heavy processor intensive applications and so on. Uh, Also, platform as a service, you have different options such as managed SQL databases. You've got open source databases that are managed by Microsoft. You've got different web platforms that can run different sort of web codes, etc. So familiarize with all of that. Now, the third thing, and also probably the most important, is to understand that not all apps will end up in the public cloud. So there are many reasons for that. Maybe because the app is really designed not to run on the cloud, or maybe the app is, maybe the owner of the app doesn't want to put it on the cloud for various numbers of reasons. Also, recommend a technical strategy including connectivity, security, identity. All right, so if you go through the funnel, starting here on the top, the first thing that you may want to take a look at if you already have a list of your applications is which ones do you want to retire? Okay, so it kind of eliminates a lot of the applications, and like I said in the previous slide, you will discover that a lot of the applications that you think you still need are actually not needed anymore. So one of our customers actually told me a funny story. He told me, Herns, do you want to know whether an application is needed or not? This is what I do. I turn it off and then wait for a couple of days. If no one complains, it means that it's not needed. That's probably not the right way to approach it, but you get my point. It's just to drive home a point. And then the remaining applications in your list, do you use it or convert it to SaaS? Right? Replace it, or for a first party or third party solution. If it's a CRM application that you custom built, replace it with Dynamics CRM. If it is Exchange Server, replace it with Office 365. If it is an old system if it's an old firewall system, you may want to consider a different firewall system that's already provided for as virtual machine images on Azure from our different vendors. So you see a number of examples here. Once you've already converted some of them into SaaS, then your list goes shorter. Expose some of the functionality into existing or SaaS solution, and then convert the rest of it into Azure PaaS solution. Optimize or move to Azure VM. And then finally, you will have the remaining set of applications that you said that there's no change. You have to move it as is to IaaS, meaning lift and shift. And a small portion may say remain on premise. So that's one. This is one approach that um, that some of our customers have taken, and it seems to work because as you can see, we illustrate it in the form of a funnel, because it is a funnel, because as you go down from the top to bottom of the funnel, the number of applications you'd have to worry about and evaluate actually go shorter. Now, when we start looking at uh, re-architecting, refactoring, or rebuilding, and rehosting, you'd have to consider which ones do you want to first to move. So some examples here of some applications that are relatively easy to move. And remember our top-down approach a while ago. Our basic web apps, portals, any new solutions, because some new solutions or relatively net new solutions that you haven't implemented yet, you may want to implement that in the cloud immediately and no longer be burdened by implementing it on-prem first before you move it to the cloud, and so on. Next to move is uh, OLTP, or any applications that require high amounts of I/O for transactions, regulatory and high business impact applications, and then leave the ones that are hardly or costly to move, such as security PKI systems, legacy source control systems, and other legacy systems that you have. And also expect results and benefits per stakeholder. You have to communicate the expected results and benefits for the stakeholders, not just the cost savings, because usually moving to the cloud is not just a matter of cost savings. It is usually the first consideration. That's why you want to move to the cloud, but it's usually not the only one. And what are your operations moving forward? How do you maintain that? How do you deploy additional components or enhanced components once it gets to the cloud? How do you monitor it and how do you maintain it? Okay, so one other way of prioritizing which one goes to the cloud is business factors in terms of criticality, regulatory exposure, content impact. Another aspect is software factors. Is it in the current version or does it need upgrades? How much monitoring does it require? How much level of virtualization do you have? Other technical factors including how much integration does it currently have with other application? Is it internet facing or not? And what is the size of the database storage? So one good guideline is to begin with less complex projects. Let's not start with the most complex, the most high risk, and the most high risk application that will expose the companies to a lot of loss if, for example, something goes wrong in between migrations or modernization. So begin with the less complex project and then gradually increase the complexity after the less complex projects have been moved, and then run a pilot project. The other important cultural aspect of migration is fostering experimentation to enhance the cloud adoption process. So fail fast, learn fast. Try many and use the best one. So we have a lot of customers who are kind of worry about this approach. Again, start with the small applications that are less risk, that are relatively easy to move to the cloud, so that you get your feet wet in terms of how you move and how you deploy cloud components, how you get used to the Azure portal, how you manage it, how you monitor it, and then once you get used to it, then you can start taking bigger and more complex migration projects. You can push the boundaries, design new applications and capabilities for PaaS, refactor legacy apps for PaaS and SaaS, and build your plan of record to take advantage of cloud capabilities. Think experience. You want to have this experience under your belt, especially if you have your own development team that needs to learn how to deploy new applications on the cloud. Use telemetry as much as you can. So every application that that you move to the cloud, turn on the monitoring capabilities of Azure so that you know how these applications are performing the moment they are after they are migrated, and as they are being used by users while they are already on the production state. Simplify. Again, the first thing, as you saw from the previous slide, retire existing legacy applications that are no longer used whenever possible. Right size the applications, because usually some applications, usually in our experience, some applications are oversized. The components that are required to run the application, let's say a server is oversized on-prem, and when it gets to the cloud, you then discover that you don't actually that need that big size of a virtual machine. Communicate to the customer and stakeholder impacts. Transparency is always the key. You do not want to keep your users in the dark. You want to make sure that you give them the confidence so that they can sign off on future projects that they control. So some common Azure migration and modernization projects is what you see here in front of you. So Windows Server, SQL Server, ASP, PHP, Java apps, Linux or open source databases, SAP moving to the cloud, and also some specialized workflows. So this is not the end all and be all or a definite list of things that you typically want to migrate, but this is just a common list of migration modernization projects. So just to whittle it down, an example here is, let's say for example you have a line of business app where you have the web and app layer logic running on Windows Server, and the data layer is running on SQL Server. So you may use, so here's an example. There's a tool in Azure called Azure Site Recovery, where you simply move the virtual machines from on-premise VM to IaaS VMs on Azure. And then you use another tool called the Database Migration Service to move the data from your on-premise data server to something called the Azure SQL Database Managed Instance. So this one is PaaS, this one is IaaS. Okay, so PaaS because the Azure SQL Database Managed Instance is consider this as a multi-tenant SQL environment, SQL Server environment where Microsoft manages everything, and you just simply have to subscribe to it and get capacity from the SQL Server and then manage it as if it was your own. So another example here for the same approach, let's say you have the same LOB app, the web and app layer are running on Windows Server or Linux, and the data layer is running on SQL Server or some sort of open source database, MySQL, Postgre, or some sort of NoSQL database. So the pure IaaS approach is to use Azure Site Recovery, which is a tool to move the VMs as is from on-premise to the cloud, move the VMs as is on-premise to the cloud. So you can see an example and full documentation of this approach here in this URL here at the bottom. If you want to take the app service PaaS route, let's say you take the same line of business applications which are currently running on Windows Server, and then you've got the data layer that's currently running on SQL Server on-prem. You can use an app service migration tool or any other third-party migration tool to get the code and run it as an app service in Azure. So the Azure App Service is simply a platform as a service or a PaaS component that runs code for you. And you don't need to worry about the size of the virtual machines. You don't have to configure any virtual machines. It's the app service that simply runs the code. And then you use the database migration service to migrate the data from on-premise to the managed instance. So for Azure migration, we have a four-step approach: assess, migrate, optimize, secure, and manage. And for each one, we have migration tools. We have expert approaches in the Azure Migration Center, scenario guidance. We also have fast track for Azure, and also access to Azure expert partners who can help you with the migration process. And also Azure fundamentals as well. So, in this four-step approach, we have different tools. These are the tools that are used by some of our partners. These are first-party tools, meaning these are tools owned by Microsoft. For assessment stage, you need to first of all find out what you currently have. Let's say the size of the virtual machines, how many VMs you have, how many databases, what versions, what's the size of the database, what are the applications that are running on those VMs in your database, what are the application platforms, and all of those details. We have a tool called Azure Migrate that evaluates all of that. And on the database side, we have the Database Migration Assistant and the SQL Server Migration Assistant that does that on the database side. On the migration service, you saw a couple of examples of using the Azure Site Recovery tool to migrate VMs from on-premise to the cloud, and also the database migration service to migrate data from on-premise database to cloud-based databases. Optimized steps is when we get all of these components to the cloud, you'd have to now know and understand how much this costs to you. So we have a tool called Azure Cost Management that shows you your ongoing and predicted costs for Azure once you already move all of these things to the cloud, because you may want to right size certain components. Speaking of right sizing, we have another tool called Azure Advisor. And what this thing does is that it constantly takes a look at how you operate your applications in Azure and gives recommendations on, for example, this virtual machine is too big. You may want to reduce this virtual machine into a smaller virtual machine, into a smaller virtual machine simply because it doesn't take advantage or leverage the size of the current size of the virtual machine. And then finally, you secure and manage. There are a number of security and management capabilities within Azure that would secure these capabilities, secure these capabilities that you currently have on Azure on an automated manner, and also gives recommendations on how to secure that. So we have the security center, backup, and monitor tools to do all of that. We also have third-party solutions that will help you do the migration. So we've got tools from partners like Movir, CloudAmize, Zerto, Cloud Atlas, BitTitan, Chef, Attunity, Informatica, and so on. So I don't have the time to go through all of this, but there are certain situations in your migration and modernization journey, and it should be part of your cloud strategy and your plan to figure out which tools you're going to use for what. Because I will be the first to admit that not in it wouldn't be our first party tools in Microsoft Azure. It won't be compatible with all types of situations. This is the reason why we have these partners who give complementary tools. So, like I said, pre-migration, we have the Azure Migrate tool that will help you migrate uh, and figure out what needs to be migrated and actually does the assessment. During migration, the Azure Site Recovery tool can help, and then post-migration, you have Azure Cost Management. First things first, you also have to make it as part of your strategy. How do you want to connect your networking and identity to Azure? So first of all, it's not uncommon for you to have an on-premise Active Directory. Since you're going to move components to Azure, one of the first things that you might want to turn on is Azure Active Directory, and make sure that you replicate objects from your on-premise Active Directory to Azure AD, because the Azure AD the users who will be using applications on Azure will also be authenticated using the same Active Directory application. Before that, how do you connect your on-premise network to the Azure network? So one way is using a VPN. So that's the most common way, is to connect your network to Azure via the public internet cloud, but using a secure connection in between called Azure VPN. You may also use third-party components to like firewalls or VPN capable firewalls on both ends, so that you can have VPN configured on both. Okay. Now, if you want to, but this is really entirely optional, you can also use Azure Express Route. This is a service that directly connects your network to Azure via a physical network connection. You may want to make that decision along the line, but make it part of your plan, especially if you are using more and more components of Azure, and if the traffic between your on-premise network and your virtual network in a hybrid environment requires a fully dedicated connection that's physical. Azure Migrate, what does it do? It looks at app performance history, configuration data, and also considers what you currently have in terms of licenses to determine what benefits you will get on Azure and discounts, and then the target Azure location. Migrate will then do assessments in your VMware and your Linux environment, and it will do what is called an Azure suitability analysis. It'll come up with a report that will actually tell you that these applications can be deployed in these types of virtual machines, and the size of the virtual machines is like this. It's going to cost you this size. It will provide you a list of right-sized Azure resources or Azure resource model and Azure cost estimates, and also an app dependency map. This is particularly important because you want to migrate. Eventually, when you migrate, you want to migrate the virtual machines in the right order, and you do not want to leave certain virtual machines behind, because some of these VMs are actually dependent on other VMs. The Azure Site Recovery tool is our primary tool, first-party tool, to set up source and target environments and to set up replication policies between VMs that are running any of these environments, even migrating from VMs running on other clouds, and also physical, and also Hyper-V or physical, running any type of operating system that's from Windows to Linux. and then config and then migrate that to Azure. This is usually what you use when you refactor. Like I said, also the database migration service takes data from different versions of SQL Server all the way back to 2005. MySQL, PostgreSQL, and also MongoDB if you're currently using MongoDB does the assessment first, and then you use the actual database migration service. The destination can be a SQL server on running on a virtual machine or on the managed SQL server, MySQL, Postgre, or Cosmos DB. So your MongoDB data can actually be migrated to Cosmos DB. Your Postgre data will be migrated to the managed Postgre service, and so on. And then you layer governance on top of that. We will have a separate webinar to discuss governance a little bit more detailed, but just to give you an overview, these are the different tools within Azure that will allow you to establish some form of strict governance, like for example, policy reinforcement on and control over what users can or cannot do in your Azure environment. Organizational hierarchies, like in some organizations, especially in larger ones, it's not uncommon to have a semblance of an organizational hierarchy so that users so that so that organizations can divide into departments, and departments and groups can be put under different departments and groups. You got Azure Blueprints. Think of Azure Blueprints as templates that can be used to easily create new resources on Azure based on a standard that you may have. Say, for example, a standard virtual machine size and configuration for development environments. So instead of asking users to create one of these from scratch, you may already have a blueprint. You just simply use that blueprint or template to create the new virtual machine. And then cost management, like I said a while ago. Cost management is, this is the screenshots of what you're going to see in cost management. As you move components from on-premise to the cloud, you will see assessment guidance, and it will give you also estimates on on how much you're going to pay for Azure if you apply the Azure Hybrid benefit, which is essentially a discount because you have software assurance on Windows Server and SQL. And also if you do reserve instances, how much is it going to cost? The cost management tool also gives you a glimpse into how much you're currently paying for these different resources, and will give you advice on how to reduce cost or optimize your cost moving forward, depending on how these applications that you've just moved to Azure are currently using your resources. So the objective really here is to maximize your long-term value. And then once you've already moved all your components to the cloud, you'd have to have a strategy and a plan to govern, like I said before, secure these different components, like using capabilities such as advanced threat protection, encryption, firewall, DDoS protection that are all available in Azure, and also from our third-party partners that can run on Azure as well. Resiliency. So let's spend a few seconds over here. So high availability for VMs. Now you have to take note that a single VM, the committed SLA for that is 99.95%. If that is not enough for you, you'd have to configure a mirrored VM in what is called an availability set, so that you increase your availability from 99.5% to 99.9%. Okay, so that 0.4% of availability would be pretty critical, especially if it's a VM that runs an application that you really want available all the time. There's a whole slew of monitoring tools within Azure that you can use that can automatically alert you if there's anything or going wrong or about to go wrong. It's AI driven, so it reads all the logs and tells you whether, let's say, for example, a database is susceptible to hacking. So it will also even recommend to you what steps you need to do in order to avoid that in the future. And we have a powerful scripting environment that's based on PowerShell that allows you to configure and do update management in an automated fashion. Okay, now the other thing that we need to consider is that our management approach will also be different now. So in a physical data center that runs VMs in a physical server, you would typically use things like System Center or built-in SQL Server tools and System Center management packs to manage your existing environment, let's assume that you are in a completely Windows Server and Microsoft environment. Once you rehost your applications, and now you have a hybrid environment that has VMs both on your physical data center and in the Azure cloud, you'd have to extend your capabilities of Windows Admin Center on Windows Server to manage both VMs on-premise and on the cloud, extend the System Center capabilities to consider components that are on Azure, including backup, and then start using Azure Security Management for governance, security, monitoring, resiliency, and automation. And then you can even extend that capability to on-premise, because a lot of the security and management tools can also monitor on-premise workloads even if they are cloud-based. And then the Azure Database Services also have their own management and monitoring capabilities that are built into their own sections of the Azure portal. So if you want to know more about the migration approach that we are taking and how our expert partners are actually doing this, you can go to azure.com/migration. And we also have another site, an interesting site called aka.ms/contoso migration, that shows you a typical migration, pretty comprehensive migration plan for a fictional company called Contoso. So let's talk about best practices, this being a cloud strategy session. So we've already talked about on the people aspect, it's important to drive cultural change and making people understand the benefits of why and the reasons why we are doing this to build a hybrid cloud environment. Set up a migration center of excellence, which is composed of people, practices, and procedures that have already been time tested and you've been vetted or even supported by an expert partner that has been doing migrations and modernization to Azure for years. Ensure the right stakeholders are engaged, and also provide learning paths and certifications. I forgot about that. We'll talk about more about learning paths in the subsequent slides, but you'll have to ensure your people that their skill sets need to be upgraded as well. For the planning and the processing side, you have to build a business case with executive sponsorship, plan the migration strategies. Like I said a while ago, start small, do a few pilots to get your feet wet in the cloud environment. Track your migration scorecard or migration report, if you will, and optimize and track your cloud spends. And the moment you start moving components to Azure, you have to make sure that you govern your Azure environments and resources properly. Extend your network and identity on Azure. We just talked about that. Establish a robust security foundation. And one good way of doing this, by the way, is to turn on Azure Security Center. That's another tool within Azure that automatically looks at the security stance of everything that you're currently running on Azure, and it's AI driven that takes advantage of all the knowledge of our cybersecurity team and gives you recommendations on how to fix potential security holes in your Azure environment. Um, Workload management approach is also going to be changing. You will find that some of your people who are used to using the time to do maintenance of server and software, they don't need to do that anymore. They will still need to do management and maintenance, but a lot of those management and maintenance tasks will have to be done at a higher plane compared to how they were doing it before. And of course, choose the migration tools that's best suited for the job. So how do you build a cloud business case? So gather the inventory, use Azure Migrate or partner tools, or ask any one of our partners to do an inventory or assessment for you. Then the partner would use an Azure pricing calculator to manually price all of the components that the migrate tool said you will need when you start migrating stuff on Azure, whether you take the rehost, refactor, rebuild, re-architect, or even the replace approach, and then use the TCO calculator. There's a tool called azure.com/TCO that will create something like this. It's pretty long. You'd have to be not really an expert, but you have to spend time using this tool because it will ask you a lot of questions about your current environment. If you don't know the answer to those questions, it will ask you questions like how many servers do you have, how old are these servers, what are the typical sizes of your VMs, how many VMs, what versions of Hyper-V are you using or VMware, and all of these other detailed technical questions. If you use these inventory tools, they can actually be inputs to the TCO calculator, or some of them you'll have to enter manually. So here's an example of a TCO report, which says, for example, that if you move to Azure, you can save up to 78%, you can save up to 68% if you rehost, and if you re-architect it, you can save up to 63%. Again, go to azure.com/TCO. It will actually come out with a nice looking Word and PDF document that you can show and present to your decision makers. Okay, so for skills, go to Microsoft/Learn. This is a site that allows you to take online courses on Azure, that allows you to build your skills quickly and measure your Azure skill proficiency, and gives you guidance on role-based certification and training. Like I said a while ago, set up a migration center of excellence that would do portfolio evaluation. It's your PMO office and also your shared services site. And you may have different migration teams that would be organized according to line of business. For example, a different migration team to migrate applications and line of business applications from different departments, or a migration team that is divided by migration strategy. You have an expert team you have a team that's expert on lifting and shifting. You have a team that's an expert on refactoring to containers. You have another team that's mostly composed of full stack developers that can do architecting and recoding and so on. Now, all of the strategies that I have just mentioned in this, we're now at the 1 hour point. I need to extend a little bit. I hope to get your permission. Is all in this book, aka.ms/Enterprise Cloud Strategy book. It's a great book by Barry Briggs and Eduardo Kastner from Microsoft Press. It's a free book, free ebook, so that you can learn how to lead the journey to cloud and drive digital innovation. So a lot of the stuff from this webinar, some of this stuff is a summary and a shortened version of what is actually written in this book. So I recommend everyone to download this book. If you can't find it in the aka.ms link here in the slide, you can just do a Google or a Bing search. You can find it there. All right, so we are at the end of this webinar. Just have a few more things to get out of the way before we call it a day. You can still get your Azure free account. Go to azure.com/free and you will get a $200 credit to spend on any Azure services across 12 months. The services that you will get are all of these services here in front of you, like virtual machines, blob storage, file storage, SQL databases, bandwidth, managed disk, and all of these other cool stuff. As long as you don't go over these limits, your $200 credit remains intact. If you use more than the limits that you see here, then your $200 credit gets debited. You also get a lot of other services for free that does not touch your $200 credit at all. So, by the way, if your $200 credit is going to be close to zero, you are going to get a friendly email reminder and also a reminder on the Azure portal that that it will ask you that or it will tell you that your credit is almost zero, and it will ask you if you want to continue using Azure services, but this time converting your actual usage into charges on the credit card that you originally used to sign up for. So if you want to learn at your own pace, like I said, learn Microsoft Learn, learn.microsoft.com or microsoft.com/learn. There are role-based courses over here. So if you click on the drop down, you can see here administrator. If you are learning to be an Azure administrator or AI engineer or data engineer or data scientist, a developer, a consultant, or a solution architect, it will pre-select the courses that in Microsoft Learn specific to the role that you have chosen. So a lot of these courses are pre-recorded courses. There are videos, there's text, and there's also lab exercises. There's a specific school just for AI. It's called aischool.microsoft.com. So if you want to learn how to create AI services or creating applications using any of the AI cognitive services for vision, speech, and also maybe for business users or for business people, if you want to understand what AI is, or how AI will impact your business and how to drive an AI culture, there's also AI Business School, which is a part of AI School. So if you have absolutely no idea what data science is, but you have a foundational knowledge of computer science, you can go to the Microsoft Professional Program. Again, it is free online training in academy.microsoft.com. If you select, for example, the data science course, it contains 12 to 48 hours of courseware that's being delivered by both Microsoft personnel and also industry experts. After you go through all of these courses, you hopefully can understand now the fairly intermediate levels of data science, so you can then pursue a career in data science if you want. Complete documentation is on Microsoft Docs, and all code samples, links to GitHub resources, or links to source codes in GitHub are actually right there. You can see it there in Microsoft Docs. Some of our friends in the industry, such as CloudSwift, are also offering courses online on Azure. So if you have any this slide here from CloudSwift is giving you they're offering something like as low as $99. You will get access to self-paced course materials, an exam voucher for proctored exams, and hands-on labs practice, and an accomplishment certificate. So they have various certifications on Azure Data Engineer and Microsoft and Dynamics 365. If you want a discount, use the promo rate that you see here when you contact them here in this part. DTLS is also another Microsoft training partner. So they do also offer Azure Fundamental Classroom courses that you can then use to expand your knowledge on Azure further as a solution architect, as an administrator, or the developer. You can see the standard list prices of their courses right here, which also includes the standard voucher. And if you want a 10% discount, contact them and use this promo code right here at the bottom and tell them that you heard this promo code from this webinar. Also offers Azure bundles training. You got Azure Fundamentals, Azure Architect Design, Azure Administrator, and so on and so forth. As you can see there in front of you, they have a promotion from August 15 to December 15, where for 45,000 pesos, for example, for Azure Architect Technologies, you can take the training, take an exam, take a retake, and also a practice test. And you can contact MISnet Education right there, as you see there. And finally, NTT Data is also another education partner for Azure. These are the different courses that NTT offers, and the standard courses right there. And if you want a discount for NTT Data, use the promo code that you see here in front of you when you contact them and tell them that you got this promo code from this webinar. Right. If you like these webinars, there are a few more coming. You should see the registration links at aka.ms/msfy20 webinars. And the next webinar is going to be on 4th September, and it's all about Azure Data Services. And you can see the other topics right there at the bottom. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for spending an hour and some minutes with me today. I hope you have learned something new. And if you've received the recording of this webinar, share it with your friends, and we hope, I certainly hope that you've learned something new for today, and this has been helpful in your journey to the cloud, specifically on Azure. If you have any more questions that I wasn't able to answer, just send me an email at hrmedia@microsoft.com. I'll gladly answer your emails as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, guys, and hope to see you in our future events and the next webinars. Goodbye.